During Ramadan, like many Muslims, I decided to read a portion of the Quran each day. And I did just that. And I was reading this translation, the Clear Quran. And sometimes I would highlight in yellow next to the passage something that really struck me. And just today, I just went back over this because I haven't really looked at these passages that I'd highlighted since Ramadan, actually, and just looked at them again. And I thought, wow, these are amazing. Some of these passages are absolutely extraordinary. And I want to share some of them with you, or almost at random, and offer some comments about some of them because some of them are very, very striking indeed. For example, there's this one from the 8th Surah, verse 50, which reads, if only you could see when the angels take the souls of the disbelievers, beating their faces and backs, saying, taste the torment of burning. This is the reward for what your hands have done. And God is never unjust to his creation. And I was struck when I first read this by a near-death experience story by an American called Howard Storm, which I'd read a couple of years ago. This is his book, My Descent into Death by Howard Storm. Now, he's an interesting character. He's still alive, actually, who was, by his own admission, an atheist, a pretty unpleasant person, he says. But he was also a professor of art. And he went on a tour to Paris with his students. And when he was there, he nearly died, basically. He ended up in hospital and had a really bad time there, actually, he says. But there's a particular bit of this story I want to share with you. What happened to him just after he, in inverted commas, died. Physically, he did. But that's not what he experienced, of course. On the dust jacket, it says this: Storm, an avowed atheist, was awaiting emergency surgery when he realized that he was at death's door. Storm found himself out of his body. This is a very common experience, the out-of-body experience. But usually when you hear about it, or at least when I do, it's all, oh, I saw angels, I saw light, and it was all very nice and heavenly. Not Storm. Oh, no. Storm found himself out of his body, looking down on the hospital room scene below, so he could see himself and everything that was going on. Next, rather than going toward the light, he found himself being tortuously dragged to excruciating realms of darkness and death, where he was physically assaulted by monstrous beings of evil. This is just what the Quran talks about, of course. His description of his pure terror and torture is unnerving in its utter originality and convincing detail, and it certainly is. Now, that's from the dust jacket. But I want to share with you what he said about this experience, which is so briefly alluded to by the Quran itself. Of course, proves the Quran that it cannot possibly be of human origin. There's no way a human being, whoever they were, could know about these realities after death. For obviously, we haven't reached that stage. So this is another confirmation of the miraculous nature of the Quran. So Storm says on page 15, back in the hospital room an eternity before, I had hoped to die and end the torment of life, because he was a really miserable atheist, he says. Now I was being forced by a mob of unfeeling people towards some unknown destination in the encroaching darkness. They began shouting and hurling insults at me, demanding that I hurry along. The more miserable I became, the more enjoyment they derived from my distress. A terrible sense of dread was growing within me. This experience was too real. In some ways, I was more aware and sensitive than I had ever been. Now, this remarkable phenomenon of hyper-awareness after death is often recounted by survivors of near-death experiences. And we find this in the Islamic tradition as well. There are sayings from the companions and others about how the next life is more real than this life. This life is like a dream in comparison with the next life. And I think for me, that's one of the notes of authenticity about these experiences, that they don't have this kind of foggy, dreamlike characteristic, or they're not like hallucinations or a drug-induced kind of thing, vision. These are ultra real, more real than our real reality. At least that's what they say. He says, he continues, everything that was happening to me couldn't be possible, yet it was happening. This was not a dream or hallucination, but I wish that it were. Everything I had experienced before this was a dream compared to the way I was now experiencing reality. I was frightened, exhausted, cold, and lost. It was clear that the help these terrible beings had first promised was just a ruse to trick me into following them. I was reluctant to go further without, but any hesitation on my part brought abuse and insults. They told me we were almost there, to shut up and take a few more steps. For a long time, I had been walking with my gaze down to watch my step. When I looked around, I was horrified to discover that we were in complete darkness. The hopelessness of my situation overwhelmed me. I told them I could go no further, to leave me alone, and that they were liars. I could feel their breath on me as they shouted and snarled insults. Then, and this is where it gets a bit horrible actually, then they began to push and shove me about. I began to fight back. A wild frenzy of taunting, screaming, and hitting ensued. I fought like a wild man. As I swung and kicked at them, they bit and tore back at me. All the while, it was obvious that they were having great fun. These are completely evil beings. Even though I couldn't see anything in the darkness, I was aware that there were dozens or hundreds of them all around and over me. My attempts to fight back only provoked greater merriment. As I continued to defend myself, I was aware that they weren't in any hurry to annihilate me. They were playing with me just as a cat plays with a mouse. Every new assault brought howls of cacophonous laughter. They began to tear off pieces of my flesh. To my horror, I realized that I was being taken apart and eaten alive, methodically, slowly, so that their entertainment would last as long as possible. It was disgusting, horrifying scenario. While I couldn't see in this total darkness, every sound and every physical sensation registered with horrifying intensity. These creatures, he says, were once human beings. The best way I can describe them is to think of the worst imaginable person, stripped of every impulse of compassion. Some of them seemed to be able to tell others what to do, but I had no sense of there being any organization to the mayhem. They didn't appear to be controlled or directed by anyone. Simply, they were a mob of beings totally driven by unbridled cruelty. In that darkness, I had intense physical contact with them when they swarmed over me. Their bodies felt exactly as human bodies do, except for two characteristics. They had very long, sharp fingernails, and their teeth were longer than normal. I'd never been bitten by a human being before this. During our struggle, they felt no pain. Other than their lack of feeling, they appeared to possess no special abilities. During my initial experience with them, they were clothed. In our intimate physical contact, I never felt any clothing. The level of noise was excruciating. Countless people laughed, yelled, and jeered. In the middle of this bedlam, I was the object of their desire. My torment was their excitement. The more I fought, the greater their thrill. Eventually, I became too badly torn up and broken to resist. Most of them gave up tormenting me because I was no longer amusing. But a few still picked and gnawed at me and ridiculed me for no longer being amusing. I had been torn apart. In that wretched state, I lay there in the darkness. And finally, he says, I haven't described everything that happened. There are things that I don't care to remember. In fact, much that occurred was simply too gruesome and disturbing to recall. I spent years of trying to suppress a lot of it. After the experience, whenever I did remember those details, I would become traumatized. And that's the end of that chapter. My Descent into Death, A Second Chance at Life by Howard Storm. And needless to say, he certainly believed in God after that experience, because he was rescued and came back and now has a very different life by all accounts. You can read his story in that book if you want. Just to remind you what the evil ending of the unbelievers, those who do not survive, those who are permanently in the next life. If only you could see when the angels take the souls of the disbelievers, beating their faces and back. If only you could see. Well, Howard Storm did see it briefly. Taste the torment of the burning. It's a horrible story, but it's a very salutary one to warn us of the realities of what happens after death. These are no hallucinations. These are very real. The danger is real, which is why the Quran, of course, warns us. So back to happier things in the Quran, which I highlighted. Almost at random, I'll just share a few of them with you. The second surah, verse 153, has this lovely paragraph about patience in difficult times. O believers, seek comfort in patience and prayer. God is truly with those who are patient. Never say that those martyred in the cause of God are dead. We can think of many martyrs at the moment, of course, who are dying for their faith and for their rights as human beings, as Muslims. Never say that these are actually dead. In fact, they are alive, but you do not perceive it. Another example of the afterlife, we in this life do not see what is really happening. We will certainly test you with a touch of fear and famine and loss of property, life, and crops. Give good news to those who patiently endure, who say when struck by a disaster, say, surely to God we belong, and to him we will all return. They are the ones who will receive God's blessings and mercy, and it is they who are rightly guided. Beautiful, beautiful passage. And here's another one about the truth about Abraham. And this, in a way, still has very contemporary resonance as well. O people of the book, why do you argue about Abraham while the Torah and the gospel were not revealed until long after him? Do you not understand? Here you are. You disputed about, here you are. You disputed about what you have little knowledge of. But why are you now arguing about what you have no knowledge of? God knows and you do not know. Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian. He submitted in all uprightness and was not a polytheist. Indeed, those who have the best claim to Abraham are his followers, this prophet and the believers, and God is the guardian of those who believe. Because some people, particularly Israelis and others, Jews today, do say that Abraham was a Jew or an Israelite, but clearly he wasn't. He lived long, long before. He was neither a Jew nor a Christian. He's one who submitted to God. And of course, submission to God is literally in Arabic what the word Muslim means. And this other passage, I say almost at random, which I highlighted during Ramadan, talks about the qualities of the hypocrites. And I remember reading this and thinking, wincing a bit about myself. Surely the hypocrites seek to deceive God, but he outwits them. When they stand up for prayer, they do it half-heartedly, only to be seen by people, hardly remembering God at all, torn between belief and disbelief, belonging neither to these believers nor to the disbelievers. And whoever God leads to stray, you will never find for them a way. It's all in God's hands. A great warning there about becoming or being a hypocrite. And then there's one of my favorite passages when it comes to Christians, really. It's such a powerful, powerful statement in the Quran. This is the 4th surah, verse 171. It's a wake-up call, really, to Christians. O people of the book, do not go to extremes regarding your faith. Say nothing about God except the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was no more than a messenger of God and the fulfillment of his word through Mary and a spirit created by a command from him. So believe in God and his messengers and do not say Trinity. Stop. For your own good. God is only one God. Glory be to him. He is far above having a son. To him belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. And God is sufficient as a trustee of affairs. The Messiah would never be too proud to be a servant of God, nor would the angels nearest to God. Those who are too proud and arrogant to worship him will be brought before him altogether. It's an amazing wake-up call to Christians there, reminding them of the facts of the case, that Jesus was just a human being, a messenger of God. And let me have a look. Oh, there's another one, fantastic one here about the true believers. Who are the true believers? What are they like? It's a beautiful description. This is from the 5th surah, verse 54. O believers, whoever among you abandons their faith, God will replace them with others who love him and are loved by him. They will be humble with the believers, but firm towards the disbelievers, struggling in the way of God, fearing no blame from anyone. This is the favor of God. He grants it to whomever he wills, and God is all bountiful, all knowing. And it was just the first verse there that also struck me. Whoever among you abandons their faith, God will replace them with others who love him and are loved by him. And I was reminded of a survey I heard about a couple of years ago in the United States, where it talks about, unfortunately, a good number of young people who are leaving Islam. These are second, third generation Muslim families. I'm not saying that, of course, they may come back, but an equal number, according to the survey, are actually coming into Islam. These are reverts to Islam. So whoever among you abandons faith, God will replace you with others who love him and are loved by him. It's all in God's control, really. Just having a look here. What else we might? Oh yes. There are some lovely surahs or passages I highlighted in surah number 11, and I really like this one. If we give people a taste of our mercy, then take it away from them, they become utterly desperate, ungrateful. But if we give them a taste of prosperity after being touched with adversity, they say, my ills are gone, and become totally prideful and boastful, except those who patiently endure and do good. It is they who will have forgiveness and a mighty reward. That's Surah 11, verse 9. And it's so true, isn't it, about how we as human beings respond to mercy. When it happens, we can, if we're not careful, if we suddenly become well off or are blessed in some way in the dunya, we can become prideful and boastful and lose humility. It's a test. Success, riches is a test of our character, of course. But also, if our mercy, he says, is taken from them, they become utterly desperate and ungrateful. And that too is a test as well, that we remain patient and grateful in times of hardship as well. But both in adversity and prosperity, we're asked to remain constant and not to give up or become arrogant. Very, very helpful to me personally as well, that passage. And then there's a fascinating verse I highlighted just before that, actually, because in the West, it's often thought that Islam believes in compulsion in religion, that people should be forced to convert to Islam. Of course, it's not true, and the Quran is very clear about this. And it's not the usual passage that goes, there is no compulsion in religion. I'm not referring to that passage, although that is obviously very relevant to this. Is another passage. It says, and this is Surah 10, had your Lord so willed, O Prophet, all people on earth would have certainly believed, every single one of them. Would you then force people to become believers? It is not for any soul to believe except by God's leave, and he will bring his wrath upon those who are unmindful. So no soul can be made to become a believer except by God's leave. We can't force faith. It's simply not possible, of course. So this is a very clear teaching about the importance of conviction rather than compulsion in religion. Plus the other verse I mentioned about there is no compulsion in religion. So there's at least 2 verses in the Quran that directly address that question. And then perhaps the last one I'll share today, close by in the same surah, towards the end of Surah 10. Say, O Prophet, O humanity, the truth has surely come to you from your Lord. So whoever chooses to be guided, it is only for their own good. And whoever chooses to stray, it is only to their own loss. And I am not a keeper over you. So it's not the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, role to be that keeper, to overseer. That's God's role to guide people. But we can choose or not, to our own good or to our own loss. And that's between us and God directly. And obviously the Quran is full of amazing wisdom and insight, and disclosure about the true nature of the afterlife for humanity to read about. It's all there in its pure, undistorted form, unlike the previous scriptures, unfortunately, which have to a greater or lesser extent either been lost completely, like the book of Abraham, or have been distorted, like the Torah or the Injil, and so on. But this remains the pure, undistorted revelation of God to mankind. Until next time.